All right, everybody, let's get into it. My guest today, Maddie Hall, the co-founder and CEO of Living Carbon. Maddie is a Forbes 30 under 30 honoree and is trying to change the game as it comes to climate change. Maddie, welcome to Everybody Pulls the Tarp.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. Really happy to be here.
Well, it's great to see you, Maddie. So you're doing some really interesting things at Living Carbon, and I want the listeners to understand in simple terms what are you setting out to do with Living Carbon?
Yeah, so Living Carbon is a climate change biotech company, and we really want to be the #1 institution when it comes to harnessing the inherent power of plants to capture and store more carbon.
So how does that impact how will that impact our daily lives if Living Carbon is successful in affecting that change?
Yeah, so the hope is really, we've warmed the world very quickly as a species, and really since we discovered fire, right? Humans have had this proprietary ability per se to create energy outside of ourselves, and that's really great for humans. But over time, we've really just been focused on extracting from our natural environment, and we haven't really focused on like how can we use the technology that we've developed, right? All of the things that allowed us to do things like make COVID vaccines really quickly, and really urbanize and advance as a species. They've been really to just extract ourselves and extract energy from the planet. And so what I would like to change for people on the day-to-day is more integration between humans and our natural ecosystem. So what that really means to me is, being able to utilize the biotechnology that we've developed and all of these really incredible advances that we see to actually help our planet, right? And to help humans not benefit just in isolation from their ecosystem, but really as a part of it.
So where did the first kind of aha moment on this for you come?
Yeah, I mean, for Living Carbon, I had been working in like artificial intelligence, machine learning at a research lab called OpenAI, and really there's so many brilliant people that are working on artificial intelligence right now, and it's amazing. But about 2.5 years ago, there were not very many people working on climate change, and I think like there's so many narratives around, okay, what can we do for AI for good, right? And to me, I started to see some of the smartest people that I know go and start climate companies. And it felt like this was such a large emerging space, and that actually like my time would be best spent working in that space. And so I did a deep dive into all the different possible ideas out there. And I just really fell in love with the idea about utilizing inherent power of plants to see what we can do using our biotechnology to improve carbon drawdown.
So what was that process like? You mentioned this deep dive. Take me through that a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, I think like, for me, I really love learning. And so I really focused on optimizing my ability to read some of these more technical papers. And so what I did is I really tried to understand the basics first, right? So I took a couple of online classes about plant biology and really made sure that I had a fundamental understanding of some of these things in a very like rudimentary way. And then I really, really leaned on a lot of great folks that I was able to get connected to just because my existing network who were PhDs, who were in the space. And I just asked people questions, right? Emailing researchers that had written papers and seeing what I could learn from them. I think a big thing about starting a company is you can't be afraid of just asking people for their take or really understanding the space. But I think, you have something that you've really grabbed onto when it's something that you can't stop thinking about. And also when it's this idea or this concept that you really care about, and it's something that you can't stop thinking about.
I think there's two really interesting points you bring up there, Maddie. One is the kind of humbleness with which you went about this research process, right? You said, I want to change something, but I don't know everything. And I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to reach out to experts. And then the second piece was what you talked about there is something, you're onto something when you can't stop thinking about it. So as you're, as you're reaching out to people and you're kind of starting to put the different puzzle pieces for this together, did that just give you increased motivation? Were there hiccups and roadblocks along the way? Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, like there was a lot of increased motivation. But when you're trying to figure out exactly the path to go down, some people deter you too, right? And they'll say, "Man, that's never going to work," or "Geez, like that sounds really hard. Why don't you start an easier startup? It's not a tree company," right? But I think that like the end of the day, you have to pick the thing that you're going to be passionate about for 10 years. Right. And if you don't, then like you're probably not going to have a very good time.
What do you do when somebody tells you, "Hey, this is too hard, pick something simpler"? I mean, you seem to have that 10-year rule, but did you just kind of go on? How did you deal with that?
I mean, I think you have to analyze the frame in which some of these people are making those statements, right? Like you really want to be doing something as a startup that people who've been in the industry say is very hard or ambitious, right? If someone says that what you're doing is easy, then it's probably going to be done before. Isn't going to actually be game changing for the climate and for climate change. So I think a lot of it just really has to do with being conscientious of the frame in which someone might be saying that, right? And it also took me back to what some people said about machine learning in the early days, that it was never going to work, and that AI wasn't really going to be a thing. And same with crypto, right? And here we are today. So in a lot of cases, the people that have been working on something the longest are not necessarily always going to be right.
So how do you how do you go from that research phase to company starting phase? Talk to me about that. How did you get connected with your co-founder? How did you go about starting the business?
Yeah, so my co-founder and I met at a climate tech conference, just a climate conference, and he was talking about like slowing the rate of decomposition of plant material underground as a means of increasing the duration of carbon sequestration. And I was talking a little bit about what we can do from a photosynthesis enhancement perspective. And our ideas really went well together. And so we started talking, we did a trial window for a couple months. And then in January 2020, we applied to Y Combinator and got in. So
what was that experience like? Were you able to really build a network of advisors and perspectives that helped accelerate things?
Well, I think I have always wanted to start a company. It was just a matter of finding the thing that I was obsessed with, right? You really kind of want to be obsessive if you're a founder, in a good way. And so for me, I had gone from being a product manager to working in a seed stage venture firm to, then learning about executive management by being a chief of staff. And so all these were kind of stepping stones to me. And throughout that time, I had really built a large network that was helpful. And I was very fortunate to be able to do that, but I'd really been investing in the community of people around me for quite some time.
So was something like entrepreneurship, was it something that was always in your blood? You say you always wanted to do it. Was it something like, do you come from a long line of entrepreneurs, or was it, there was a point in life when your interest was piqued?
Yeah, I mean, I think my father is also an entrepreneur, and I think there was always just a belief that there's nothing we couldn't do as kids, right? And I say that more from like an ambition perspective. We definitely had rules, but I think having that framework and encouraging kids to be leaders when they're younger is really, really important. Whether it's being class president of your elementary school or starting a new club or something like that. I think I had been really interested in politics actually, but then spent one summer on the Hill and it was not for me. So I think you realize how much more of an impact you can have sometimes, and you can create something that otherwise wouldn't exist with starting your own company. And that's really cool because you get to be really intentional about how you build culture and team from the very start.
Maddie, that's really interesting. So your parents created this belief in you from an early age that you could do anything you wanted, anything you put your mind to. How did they kind of model that behavior for you at a young age?
I mean, I think just like being resilient and tenacious and, you know, being willing to be unique and different and not necessarily follow the path of, becoming a doctor. My dad was a physical therapist and then started a physical therapy company. So I think like really being brave and forging your own path.
So so let's talk about the plant biotech. So was that like that was just kind of a discovery that you made, like you said earlier, that you realized your interest was drawn to?
Well, I think, like plants have always been a big part of my life. Like both my grandmother and my mother spent a lot of time arranging flowers. My grandma has been really involved in the Arboretum Society, and my uncle has a logging company. So I think I also, growing up in Seattle, I had just like a appreciation and familial connection to plants and trees. And I think that it was a very good founder market fit per se.
That is interesting. It's so interesting to see how you kind of went on this journey of what might be interesting to you, and you kind of brought together all these different parts of your life and your family experiences. So, okay, now take me behind the scenes of being a founder of a venture backed business, one that you're trying to scale here quickly. What are some of the things, it looks glamorous on the surface, right? Forbes 30 under 30, lots happening. Take people kind of behind the scenes. What was most surprising for you when you jumped into this startup business?
I think how much it changes as the company grows, right? Like everyone talks about that, but then, you really realize just how quickly you can go from doing everything to having, folks who are specialized in this one area per se. Of course, you still want a lot of like very talented generalists, but I think that to me was always something that people had mentioned, and I think also, just maintaining like a really high bar when it comes to hiring is so important. Like really, my number one job is like hiring amazing people who can work on solving some of these R&D challenges and who can actually bring products to market. So I think that as a founder, that's really one of your number one jobs.
How have you gone about that? Like, do you have a process for hiring? Do you have core values that you're looking for? How does that work?
Yeah, I think values are really important as a company. You don't want to create them too early because you're still sort of forming. But when we were about, I think it was 15 people, we did some exercises where everyone basically wrote down every sort of possible value that they could think of for the company. And we talked about at first like why companies need to have values and what values are used for. Right. In a lot of cases, values can sometimes be like a framework for knowing what to focus on, who to work with, what sort of products to bring to market, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, and then from there, really, we did a big brainstorm with the entire team, collected them into different subgroups of values that we felt like had similar themes, then tried to reframe those as a team. And then eventually we honed in on the ones that were the most important to us. And then wrote a little bit about some behaviors that we think actually like live those values, because I think you want values that are not just like fluff, and that also really the counterfactual could be said. Like I think values that are just like be kind. Well, you'd never want to have a company that's like be unkind. So like how does that really differentiate you as an organization? So I think that's really important. And then also like referrals, like some of the best ways to get people that are really like high quality early on is people who like are through a connection of a connection or something like that, because those are already filters that are built in, just by the fact that you have an existing connection with that person and you probably respect them or can learn from them in other ways.
Besides the technical expertise and the kind of specific, domain authority that a person has in a particular area, what are some of the little things that you're looking for in people that you hire?
I think a sense of like motivation, right? So what motivates them? What do they care about? I think we look for people that feel like mission aligned. There's like a degree of plantiness that we look forward to, and that was kind of a like hard to evaluate nebulous quality that's on our rubric. And you know, I think how self-motivated they are, ability to execute, right? That really matters a lot when it comes to startups. And self-awareness, right? Um, if we ask them what their references will say about them and then talk to their references and it's completely different, you know. So there's a degree of self-awareness that we expect. Not everyone's going to be perfect or even have every single you know, past experience that you might want, but I think self-awareness is a good proxy for self-growth.
Self-awareness is so important. It is a great proxy for growth. What about the motivation? How do you size up whether the person has that fire in the belly?
Well, I think you can ask a fair amount of questions around like understanding exactly what they did when they're explaining like a particular project, and also like how they um, deal with challenges that they've faced, how they solve problems. So I think like behavioral interviewing questions are generally good. You know, tell me about a time when, because that actually gets people to think through, okay, like what's an example for me of this thing.
How do you think about, I mean, the challenges that you're trying to solve, right? You're going to, you know, ultimately need large scale adoption of fundamental changes to the way we do things. How do you think about that? Like, you know, there's people talk about change management in organizations a lot, right? Change management in teams and in cultures. But how do you think about the mission that you have to change the way society thinks about some of these issues that you're trying to solve, and what role is that playing in the way you're going about this?
Well, I think, you know, you really want to be on the frontier of some of these movements, right? And I think we've seen in the past 2 years with, you know, really an explosion of climate tech companies in the best way possible. And so you want to kind of keep thinking about like, how can I be on the frontier of this space, right? And what are the key indicators that the rest of the world are probably going to follow, right? There are some hypotheses that I have to make it living carbon that like, you know, if you don't agree with them, you're probably not going to want to be a part of the company, right? One is that like the value of capturing a ton of carbon is going to increase over time, right? And be more valuable over time as climate change accelerates. And you know, that's something that corporations want. I think one thing that we've seen this time that's probably different than other like movements and around clean tech and stuff is just the sustained corporate interest that's irrespective of politics. So I think the more that you can separate out, like you never want, you know, the success of your business to be dependent on a certain political system. So I think for us, you know, really seeing all of the commitments from the large corporations to purchase carbon credits, go carbon neutral, that's really exciting. To get large scale adoption, I think you have to be profitable, right? And you have to make sense to landowners and to people who, you know, would be your customers. It has to make economic sense. I think a really good way to drive adoption for an environmental product is if it's just also a better product. It's not necessarily, oh, plant these trees because, you know, they're capturing more carbon. It's no, plant these trees because, you know, after 25 years, you'll have more biomass that can be harvested and used for sustainable wood products. And telling that story, I think, is really important for us.
How do you deal with doubt when doubt creeps in, right? Like, are there times when you say to yourself, oh, I wonder if this is going to work. I wonder if I'm going to be able to get this thing from the where it is today to the where I think it can go. How do you deal with doubt?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think we're fortunate in that we've de-risked a lot of the technical side of things at this point. But you know, I think there's always risk with startups, and you know, it's a roller coaster. That's what you sign up for, and so you have to kind of just tell yourself that. And if some days are bad, you have to say, okay, all right, tomorrow could be better, and just kind of embrace the roller coaster, right? Because it's what you got yourself onto. And you know, I think also it really comes down to prioritization, right? So understanding like what should be distracting to you when it goes wrong and what should not, right? So, I think if you have set your OKRs well and set your goals well, and then I think you're able to ignore some of the things that might have otherwise caused, an immediate emotional response or an immediate, oh shoot. But actually, when you think about it in the context of what you're trying to achieve, it's relatively minor. So perspective.
A perspective is so important, especially
Yeah.
these days, right? And I always say, like you're never as great as you are on your best day. You're never as bad as you are on your worst day. You're always somewhere in between. And that level-headedness, that mindfulness about staying the course and keeping perspective, as you say, is so critical. Before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about goal setting. Like, how do you go about your goal setting process and making sure that the right metrics are in place, and that those drive kind of the filtering out of things that would become otherwise distractions to the mission of what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, so I think we do goal setting at Living Carbon by basically drafting OKRs, so objectives and key results. And for that, generally what we do is we have people who are leaders in different departments draft up what the company OKRs could be, right? So this is for the entire organization, because you want people to have an opinion on this, right? What should the company be working on? And so what I do is everyone will draft up what they think the company should be working on for the next quarter. We do quarterly goal setting. It's different depending on the team in terms of what cadence you should be setting your goals, but I think quarters are good. Because otherwise, if you're resetting your goals at every month, it can be a little bit of like process churn. But generally then what you're going to want to do is I combine all of those different drafts into one draft and then send it out for the team for feedback. I think to create a lot of buy-in for organizations, you want people to have input. And then I'll incorporate feedback later on, and then we'll circulate it out more broadly. So yeah, and OKR frameworks have been around for a long time. We also try to make sure that we're tracking OKRs and checking in every month to make sure that we're on track or we're not on track. And you want to be ambitious, right? If you accomplish 70% of your OKR, that should be good.
Absolutely. If you accomplish 70% of an ambitious goal, it should be pretty good. Maddie,
Yeah.
you are changing. You're going to change the planet with the drive and focus and technical ability that you've developed through the research and hard work and pulling the tarp, as I like to say. So, Maddie, thank you for spending a little bit of time with me this week. Keep doing your thing, and we'll have to check in again soon and see all the progress that you make between now and then.